Today what I want to talk about is sourdough for beginners and how you can get a really good artisan style sourdough loaf without having a lot of extra accessories. So a lot of recipes for sourdough bread, you need a lot of gear. You need a proofing basket, a lidded Dutch oven, parchment paper, a lot of expensive accessories. And these definitely do make baking easier. But if you're just getting started and you don't know whether sourdough is something you're really going to stick with, you don't want to spend a lot of money and accumulate a lot of extra junk in your house. So I wanted to develop this recipe to show you how you can do an artisan style loaf with things you already have in your kitchen. All you're going to need for this is a sourdough starter. You can make your own if you want to look online for instructions on how to do that. I've never done it. I've always just gotten one from King Arthur Flour, which is about $6, and it's worked really, really well for me. You're also going to need bread flour. It's way better than all-purpose for a chewy style sourdough loaf. And other than that, I'm going to do this with just a baking sheet and no other accessories. So it's not going to be a super high hydration dough, which means it's not going to have as much water as many of the more artisan style recipes, but it's still going to give you a really pretty round shape with a good rise, good open crumb. And I really hope that it gets you into sourdough and that maybe eventually you do accumulate some of those extra goodies that are going to help you with a higher hydration, even rounder, more beautiful dough with all the slashes and the fancy look to it. But this is a great starting point for when you don't have all those things and you just want to know if sourdough is right for you. So let's get started. It's just flour, water, salt, and your starter.
Okay, so I'm going to assume you don't have a scale, and we are just going to do this using volume measurements. So we're going to do 1 1/4 cup of your starter. It should be a really healthy, mature starter for this recipe to go well. Your starter is super important. And then start mixing your flour in. We're going to go 2 1/2 cups of bread flour. When you stir it in, it's obviously going to be too dry because we still need water in the recipe. So get 1 cup of water and then add it little by little. So do about half. You'll see that you're still seeing dry bits of dough, and then add it a little bit at a time until your dough is sticky but not wet. You're also at this point going to add 1/4 teaspoon of sugar. So keep on stirring it. You can see here what it should look like. Sort of shaggy and sticky, but not wet. Sort of clearing the bowl, but not really. This step is called autolyze. We're going to cover it with a damp towel, let it sit out at room temperature, and it just hydrates all the flour and lets everything sort of get acquainted. 20 minutes to an hour, autolyze. Now we're going to add our salt. So 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt, and then we're going to knead the dough a little bit to give it a little bit of structure. So you can kind of mix that in with your spoon, and then take the dough out, knead it by hand only for about 1 minute. It should look a little bit smoother, but it's still going to be pretty sticky. And then what I like to do is sort of pull it out flat, make sure all the salt has been worked in, and then shape it back into a ball. It's going to rise at warm room temperature for 2 hours. So you can put it in your oven, warmed up a little tiny bit, and then turn it off. Make sure you grease your bowl before you put the dough in. So it's risen for 2 hours. You can see it looks really nice and puffy. And now we're going to prepare our baking sheet. If you don't have parchment, use baking spray and a generous amount of cornmeal to keep it from sticking. And when you shape your loaf, you don't want to mash it down or punch it down. You want to just gently pinch that loaf, pull it into even more of a round shape, and then flip it over. So you can see how you do this, kind of pull it from the bottom. You're shaping, what you're seeing now is going to be the bottom of your loaf. And when you flip it over, and it should come out really easily because you greased the bowl, you have a pretty round loaf. Once we've shaped it, it does its second rise at a cooler room temperature. So not in a warmed oven, just out on your counter. I wouldn't really do it in the fridge unless you have a lot of time. I'm going to do a 2-hour rise at cool room temperature and cover it with greased plastic wrap because it's a sticky dough. And if you cover it with a towel and it sticks to it, when you pull that towel off, it's just going to be ruined. So generously grease your plastic wrap with a baking spray and loosely put that on top. We are going to have it rise for 2 hours, but halfway through the rise, we're going to come back and slash it and do the flour. So 1 hour later, we come back, remove the plastic wrap, and sprinkle it with flour and rub that flour in. You want it all over, and we're just going to use a plain old serrated knife to do this slash. At this point, we're going to preheat the oven And make sure when you preheat your oven, you put an empty baking sheet in as well. We have to create steam somehow in our oven. We're not using any type of fancy cover or dish for this dough. So our workaround is to create steam just using the oven and a baking sheet. So oven at 450, baking sheet on a lower rack. And then when you put the bread in, you want to pour in a cup of water to create steam. It's going to bake for between 30 and 40 minutes. It should look very brown on the outside, and the inside temperature should be about 200 degrees. So you can see it's a really pretty loaf, especially for not having any type of gear. You want to let it cool up to really about 3 to 4 hours is best. I'm going to go ahead and cut into it right now so I can show you guys the inside. The crumb is pretty. It's not as open as a lot of loaves that you'll see online, but for not having any type of accessories, I think this is really good, and you should be proud to serve it to anyone.